So hello, everyone. This is Michael Butterman, music director of the Boulder Philharmonic Orchestra, and I'm delighted today to be joined by two wonderful colleagues from Boulder. We have Charles Weatherby, who is our concertmaster, and also Abigail Nims, mezzo-soprano. Both of these persons, in addition to having a connection to the Boulder Philharmonic, are also on the faculty at the College of Music at the University of Colorado, and they were kind enough to join me today. We're going to be talking about one of my very favorite and I think one of the most moving moments in this incredibly moving piece, the St. Matthew Passion of Johann Sebastian Bach, a piece that we did in 2016 in a sort of unusual version in which we actually had a bit of staging in addition to playing all of the music. And the aria that we're going to talk about is called Erbarme dich, which is in the toward the beginning of the second part of the piece, and it is a aria for mezzo soprano. But there's a very important role for the solo violin to play as well. And so I wanted to just kind of talk a little bit about what you're going to see when you watch the rest of this video, and get a little bit of context for understanding it. So I might just begin with you, Abby, and ask you to kind of just set up for us where this falls in the Passion story, and to some extent what the text is all about, what you're saying or what you're conveying when you sing this.
Sure. Yeah. So this is the moment in the Passion when Peter denies Jesus 3 times, and he betrays him basically in this moment. And the aria comes after Peter has the realization that he was going to do this, that Jesus had told him that he would deny him, even though he said he would never do that. He comes to realize that this is exactly what Jesus had told him would happen. He said, "You will deny me 3 times before the cock crows." And he hears the cock crow, and he realizes that it's happened, and he weeps bitterly. And that's what this aria is reflecting, is just his guilt and his remorse and his just feelings of being completely overcome by emotion of what he has done and how horrible he feels. And he's asking God for mercy. Basically, he says, "Have mercy, God, that for the sake of my tears, look here, heart and eyes weep bitterly before you. Have mercy." So he's completely overcome in this moment.
And what's interesting, of course, is that in this Passion we have various persons who portray specific people. We have Judas and Pontius Pilate and in this case Peter. So it's perhaps a curious choice. Why wouldn't Bach have asked the person who was singing Peter to actually then go into a moment of remorse? But instead you come in kind of representing maybe almost a modern day person's observation of this and putting themselves, I'm guessing, sort of in the place of Peter. Is that the way you perceive it?
That's kind of how I see it too. Yeah, I think I've always seen this as just the human response. Even it doesn't have to be so specifically Peter's. It probably was sort of intended that way, but to me it sort of feels like it could be any human expressing this remorse of what has just happened. I think in the Passion, that's the whole thing, is that everyone has so much remorse for what we've done to Jesus.
Right. So in this aria, then, there is a very prominent role for the solo violin to play, with no text, of course. But I'm wondering, Chaz, what you think of the relationship between the violin and the mezzo-soprano solo. Are you is this kind of a duet? Are you textlessly saying the same thing, or are you kind of providing a counterpoint idea of some kind? Or what do you think is? How do you perceive that when you're playing it? I guess
it's. I think it's probably the former in the sense that it's a true duet. It's very interesting writing. First of all, the violin has the first statement of the melody, and maybe unusual in some ways. There are times when, rather than playing a counterpoint or a counter melody to the voice, it's actually the voice that will do so for the violin. So truly, there's a very equal sharing between the two of us of this melody. He also makes the choice of keeping the range of the violin solo and the voice oftentimes very close, almost doubling at times, and rather than having a contrast between what could be used like the upper register of the violin or lower to keep us in separate kind of timbres. He actually chooses to interweave the two So in that sense, it's really a quite extraordinary manner of writing. The other thing that strikes me about the writing for the violin in particular is that probably like a lot of violin students, my first encounter with Bach was the violin concertos he wrote, and especially the 6 solo violin sonatas and partitas. And those works are, to my ear, almost entirely instrumental in their writing. That is to say, he uses the instrument very idiomatically and very much taking advantage of the chords, double stops, triple stops, and things that the violin can play. Whereas this aria is so much focusing on the role of the violin as another vocal kind of instrument. So it's a really just a wonderful use of the instrument, I think.
You're right. I think it's very lyrical writing, I think you would say. And the director made an interesting choice, our stage director, Bob New, when he had you, Chaz, come forward out of the orchestra, actually stand up with no music stand, and play essentially right next to Abby as she is singing. I guess, I mean, it seems that obviously emphasizes the sort of equal partnership, if you will, between the violin and the viola. I'm wondering, maybe from your standpoint, how, I mean, did that, what was that like? You know, you're not normally, it's not a concerto, so you weren't, it wasn't like you were memorizing like you would a, Beethoven concerto or something, but I mean, yeah, what was that experience like?
Well, it's interesting. It's because it's very freeing. In some respects, I much prefer to stand when I play. Sitting down and having your weight sort of set in a chair where you have that much less freedom, in a way is maybe very confining. So that's just thinking physically and how that translates into how you feel mentally when you're playing something. It was also really, I just loved that whole performance because the elements of even slight staging like that really made me think about my role beyond just the instrumentalist sitting in the orchestra playing particular notes. It made me kind of raise or enlarge my consciousness, actually, even as playing.
I think it humanizes or makes more universal the whole sense of what this piece is really all about. You are not, the orchestra is in no way accompanying, but we are absolutely all sharing our common humanity in the experience of this story. So Abby, he talked about standing up when he's playing. You, on the other hand, in this aria, we're sitting down, which is perhaps not what an opera singer is most often doing. Why was that? I'm not going to ask you to necessarily get into the head of our stage director exactly, but to the extent that you understood your motivation for sitting, why was that? And also, is that a different kind of experience sitting than if you were standing?
Right. Yeah. It is a different experience. I think in this staging, it was because of Peter was feeling so overcome and he would have had to sit down. I don't think someone would be standing in that situation feeling so overwhelmed by his emotion there. And I think that's probably why I was sitting. I actually loved it in this context. Sometimes I think if I were singing a big operatic aria with a higher range, I probably wouldn't have been quite as happy. But this is mostly middle range for me. And because of that, it allowed me to really just sink in a way that allowed me to feel more in tune with, I think, what the emotion I was trying to express was. I really appreciated that. For some reason, it was exactly what I needed. In some ways, the way Chaz was talking about sort of feeling confined to one position is what I needed to feel in that moment to express that piece. And so I think I would have felt a little strange standing. I mean, obviously in a concert version you do, but in this context, it felt exactly right to me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I certainly had that impression as I was rewatching the video, and and of course there's behind you a couple of persons who are sort of, if you will, the story has sort of suspended for a moment, it seems, and they are sort of there, but they're still. They're not really interacting with you at all, but in a way, as happens in especially Baroque opera, when we have recitatives that advance the story, and then we pause and sort of reflect on it emotionally with an aria, and I think that's essentially what has happened in this piece. I want to just maybe circle back for a moment to something that Chaz mentioned about the difference between instrumental writing and vocal writing. I'm just wondering what you think, Abby. He was saying that the violin felt a little more lyrical and a little more vocal in a way than it does, let's say, in the solo partitas and sonatas. But what about Bach's vocal writing in general? Maybe not even so much this aria, but some others that you know. I have the experience from talking to choral singers and also from conducting a fair bit of choral music that some Bach choral writing in particular, especially I think in the cantatas, can often feel a little instrumental, which is to say that there are sort of awkward leaps that one finds, and I don't know, just sort of passages that feel just uncomfortable to sing, or just sort of not natural in a way that he was thinking perhaps as a keyboardist or maybe even as a string player as he's writing vocal lines. Do you find that in this aria, for one thing? And then secondly, I mean, do you find that, or do you think that's just a mischaracterization of some of Bach's vocal writing, or was he sort of all over the map with what he?
Yeah. Well, I personally, I love to sing Bach. It's probably my very favorite thing to sing. So I have to say that first. But I do think a lot of singers really shy away from Bach because the first thing that you always hear is there's nowhere to breathe in Bach. There's just literally nowhere to breathe. You're constantly having to catch breaths where you can, and it never feels very natural in terms of the way we're taught to breathe in singing. So there's that. But yes, the instrumental aspect, personally, again, I do love it myself, but I know a lot of people find it's so different than opera in a lot of ways. It's generally less lyrical, and I think Erbarme dich is one of the biggest exceptions. It's this Erbarme dich, I think, is often really beloved among those who cherish opera because it does have more of that operatic feel to it, these long sweeping lines that to me sort of sound like wailing. And it's just so emotional, it's so dramatic that I think those people who really, really love opera are more drawn to this aria than some of his other arias.
Right.
But I think even in the St. Matthew Passion, the alto role is so varied. Many of the other arias are much more instrumental. Boston Troy, I think of as much more instrumental, and some of the ones where she's singing with the orchestra or the chorus, excuse me, they feel more instrumental to me by nature as well than this one. This one sort of stands alone to me that way.
Yeah. Well, it's a really interesting, the whole piece is, of course, very long. It's about 3 hours of music, and we have a tremendous range of styles, chorally, vocally, and also I think instrumentally. I mean, Chaz, obviously the orchestra is sometimes playing chorales, just sort of doubling, if you will, what the choir is singing. Other times it is kind of mostly sustaining chords, this sort of halo effect that in first orchestra strings provide whenever Jesus is singing or conveying text. And then we have moments like the one that we're discussing, where you sort of step out and become almost another character in the drama somehow. I guess I'm just wondering, are there any, getting ready to watch the video and relive this wonderful piece of music, anything else that either if you wanted to add or share with our listeners, with our viewers?
I would just say it was a very special moment, and I'm glad to be doing this today, to have had a moment to reflect on it. It was, I think, a really meaningful, the whole piece, doing the whole St. Matthew with Boulder Phil was really meaningful. But this aria in particular, I think, really was something special. So I'm just glad to have this opportunity to reflect on it.
Yeah, I certainly feel the same. I think, Chaz, for me, it's one of the, one of my fondest memories of my time in the Boulder Phil is producing this piece of music, and I hope that's shared by the orchestra as well.
Yeah, it was a really wonderful performance that I think back on often, and it was actually this aria was a piece that I had learned a long time ago, played with piano, as unsatisfying as that can be, just in preparation of auditions. And this was actually the first time I got to perform the work. So it was really...
Well, I'm so glad we could be the beneficiaries of that opportunity. So I thank you both for spending some time with us today, and I thank our viewers and listeners for having a listen. And we look forward to sharing this performance with you, which should be coming up right now. Thanks to both of you.
you.